What is going on, guys, and welcome back to Touchdowns to Home Runs. My name is Bernie. Thank you for joining us today on the Touchdowns to Home Runs show. Hope that your day is going absolutely fantastic. As we get closer and closer to what should be a very interesting offseason for the Toronto Raptors, we continue to preview and break down sort of their biggest issues that need to be addressed in the upcoming months. With that being said, today we're going to take another look at their roster and break down the three glaring holes that I think the Raptors roster has going into the offseason that they definitely need to be taking a look into. First up, we have the front court rotation. I think, from everything that I've heard and from everything that I've watched, there's a pretty clear consensus that this should be the Raptors' number one priority, and really rightfully so. This past season, the Raptors struggled as a team, but they really struggled primarily with finding real quality, valuable minutes at the center position. The Aaron Baines experiment that the Raptors took a shot at failed tremendously. 6.1 points per game, 5.2 boards, 18.5 minutes per game. However, the Raptors, to be fair, did see the emergence of Chris Boucher. Khem Birch provided some light at the end of the tunnel, sort of at the center position. But with that being said, I think the Raptors still have a glaring weakness with the production from the big men. And really, at the end of the day, I think on a real contending roster, at least with the way that Boucher and Khem Birch are right now, I think you want to get them off the bench, add some bench depth at the 4 and the 5. The Raptors do have a lot of different ways that they could address this center issue. I think it just comes down to how they want to sort of attack it. You got a good position in the draft with an opportunity to move up in the draft lottery. You get a good piece that way. Definitely should have some money freeing up in free agency. They got a couple of guys leaving, Rodney Hood, Aaron Baines, and I assume Lowry's not coming back either, so potential to go into the free agency market, add a piece that way. And then also, I think you got a few other young pieces that look enticing to teams. I think a trade scenario is definitely on the table, especially if you want to trade for a higher end center. I think that's the way you go. But let's start with the free agency class now. I've sort of looked at this. I'm not a huge fan of a lot of the guys in the class. Not really stars at the position, but I do think that if you're trying to save some money, that the Raptors will be able to get a serviceable and immediate impact player, I think, from this free agency pool. Guys like Cody Zeller, Nerlens Noel would be major pickups for the Raptors and would add legitimate size, rim protection, rebounding, things that the Raptors didn't really have last year. And again, I think without really breaking the bank and spending too much money in free agency. The draft is the other major option that I think a lot of people are looking at because it does give the Raptors quite a bit of opportunity to improve, and you don't necessarily have to be drafting super high. Now, if the Raptors do move up into the top 4 with the lottery, I think Evan Mobley is probably the guy to go to the Raptors. But Kai Jones, probably mid to later first round, is definitely somebody from Texas that I think could be an immediate impact player, more off the bench for the Raptors next year. But again, definitely look at him. And then I hope I'm pronouncing this name right, Şengün, the international player, the international center, definitely a guy that I've heard the Raptors apparently looking into, and a guy that I think, again, could make a impact for the Raptors right away. I think, again, it just comes down to the Raptors need to find just a true center. The Raptors need help cleaning up the defensive glass for sure in order to give them just an improved chance of staying in games and winning some close games that I think they lost last year. Definitely would have been more into if they had done a better job, especially on the glass. So, yeah, definitely need to address the center position. Next up is actually one that I sort of wasn't thinking of before, but the more and more I think about it, the more that I think the Raptors need to be putting money into, and it's their bench depth. Last season, the Raptors did a very solid job with, I guess, what you would call next man up, all the injuries they sustained throughout the year, which unfortunately had to move some of the guys who would normally be on the Raptors bench. You had to move them into the starting lineup, so sort of all of the bench production was a little bit messed up, but with that being said, the Raptors were dead last in the NBA with only 30 bench points per game. They definitely had depth issues, struggled to close out games, really struggled the entire season to get production from the second unit. Now, again, I give the Raptors some slack because of the injuries, but I still do think they need to add some depth there. So far this offseason, though, I've only heard about the Raptors adding, potential guards and players to replace a guy like Lowry on the starting lineup. But what about adding a really similar guy, but to the bench instead? In my opinion, a veteran guard option off the bench would be something very, very, huge and beneficial for the Raptors. Guys like Tim Hardaway Jr., Denis Schroder, guys who are going to be in free agency. I don't see a guy like Schroder going back to the Lakers, so they're going to be unrestricted free agents in the summer, and they might actually be perfect fits for the Raptors. In the past, the Raptors, again, have been built around this bench scoring and their bench depth, and they've always had sort of that one guy who really bolsters them. And, you see the differences in depthy teams and teams who aren't depthy. In the past, Lou Williams, Fred VanVleet, Norman Powell, all guys who have been that guy off the bench for the Raptors, especially in terms of scoring. And I think a guy like Denis Schroder, who definitely can score the basketball, can facilitate a little bit, is definitely somebody who can help the flow and bolster that second bench unit as well. I think the Raptors should definitely look into, maybe not necessarily these guys, but they definitely should look into some additions, I think, veteran options off the bench, just because they're so young. Like right now, they're projected to have Boucher as their oldest guy off the bench, only 28 years old. So again, that veteran experience might be what bolsters the Raptors here. Last up in third, and this is sort of broad, but the Raptors need that guy who helps them find an identity. Assuming Lowry doesn't come back, whether he just doesn't re-sign, or the most likely option, which is a sign and trade, and it's looking more and more likely as we get deeper into the offseason, the Raptors are losing sort of that identity piece. I think rightfully so, though, Lowry doesn't fit the core of the Raptors moving forward, so the sign and trade does make a lot of sense. But, looking at it on the flip side, he's been the face guy for the Raptors essentially for the better part of the last decade. So a huge sort of change in leadership there, a huge face for the Raptors that they need to switch up. Also, majority of the core for the Raptors in 2019 is no longer on the roster, so they definitely need a guy like potentially Siakam to be able to step up for them. With that being said, also the team philosophy is going to be changing. They've tended to be a team in the past couple of years that's been sort of, I guess, what you'd call strength in numbers. Solid bench utilization, gritty defensive team. But that's not what the Raptors currently are. And I think that's what the Raptors struggled to understand last year with that identity piece. They need to have a different play style. There's no question the Raptors have a solid combo of both youth and talent, and I think Nick Nurse needs to develop a play style that's really suitable for the way that their depth chart is currently laid out. In my opinion, you look at the explosiveness of the team, how athletic guys like Siakam and Anunoby, those type of guys are, and I think it really suits the Raptors to go into a more up-tempo offense and establish dominance through being able to score the basketball. And that's not necessarily to say that the Raptors shouldn't be focusing on defense, but I definitely think with the way that the roster is structured, that you can outscore teams. And with another piece, potentially some more production off the bench than the Raptors had last year, I definitely think that's the direction to go. But anyways, guys, if you did make it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts on anything that I talked about today down in the comment section below. Let's get a discussion going. If you did enjoy today's video, make sure to let me know, though, by leaving a thumbs up. Subscribe to Touchdowns to Home Runs for more content just like this. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again next time.